This 8279 programmable keyboard display controller, it is used to interface the keyboard and the display devices with the central processing unit or the microprocessor based systems like 8085, 8086 or 8088. So we can say that this 8279, it acts as an interfacing unit between the keyboard and the display devices and the CPU or the processor. Okay. So this 8279, it is interfacing the keyboard and the display devices with the CPU, and we know that this keyboard, it is an input device and display devices, they act as an output devices. So keyboard, it is an input device, and display devices like monitor, printer, they are the output devices. So based on the interfacing unit, that whether the keyboard is connected with the 8279 or whether the display devices they are connected with 8279, based on this there are two modes of operation of this 8279. So let us come to the modes of operation of 8279. First is the input or the keyboard mode. And second is the output or the display modes. So these are the two modes of operation of 8279 based on whether the keyboard is connected with 8279 or the display devices are connected with the 8279. Keyboard, it is an input device, so it is known as the input mode, and display devices are the output devices, so it is known as the output mode. So let us first study the input or the keyboard modes. There are three types of input modes, or we can say the keyboard mode. First is scanned keyboard mode. Second is scanned sensor matrix. And third is the strobed input. So there are the three input modes: scanned keyboard mode, scanned sensor matrix, and strobed input. The scanned keyboard mode, it is further of three types. First, we will study these three modes one by one. So let us start with the scanned keyboard mode. As the name says that it is the scanned keyboard mode, so in this mode the 8279, it is going to scan the keyboard, or we can say that this mode allows to interface the keyboard with the 8279. Okay. So in this mode, the keyboard is interfaced with the central processing unit, and this interfacing of the keyboard with the CPU, it can be done using either the encoded or the decoded scans. That is why in this mode we have given the name scanned keyboard mode. So there are two types of scans, the encoded scans or the decoded scans, through which the keyboard can be interfaced with the CPU. So let us study these two scans. In the encoded scan, so the difference between the encoded and the decoded scans, it is the range, or it is the specification of the keyboard which is interfaced. So in the encoded scan, an 8x8 keyboard can be interfaced, and in the decoded scan, a 4x8 keyboard can be interfaced. So it is the size which is different in both these scans, encoded and decoded scans. Now, if in this keyboard scan mode, because we are scanning the keyboard, this 827, and it is going to scan the keyboard that whether the key is pressed or not. And if a key is pressed on the keyboard, then the response of that keyboard or the key code which is related to that key which is pressed will be stored in the FIFO RAM of the keyboard. Okay, and the status of the key which is pressed along with the shift and the control keys status, that will be stored in the FIFO RAM. So we can say that the code of the key which is pressed, so the whenever the key is pressed on the keyboard, then the code related to that key which is pressed along with the shift and control key status, that whether these keys are pressed or not, so the code plus the shift and control key status all are stored in the FIFO RAM of the keyboard. Okay, now this scanned keyboard mode, it is further of three types. First is the scan keyboard mode with 2 key lockout. Then we have scan keyboard mode with N key lockout, and third is the scan keyboard special error mode. So let us study these three modes of the scan keyboard mode. First we will have the scan keyboard mode with 2 key lockout. Now when the user it uses the keyboard, it may happens that two keys are pressed or more than one key is pressed at a time. Now when such situations occur, then what the 8279 it is going to do, in this 2 key lockout mode, the key 8279 it is going to scan the key code of the first key which is pressed, and the second keys or the keys which are pressed after the first key, they will be ignored. So only the key code related to the first key will be functioned by the or will be assessed by the CPU. Okay, so this is the 2 key lockout mode. So in this mode, when a key is pressed, a debounce logic comes into action, and this debounce logic, it is going to store the key code of the identified key is entered into the FIFO RAM with the shift and control key status, provided that the FIFO is not full. FIFO here, it is the RAM. We are representing RAM here, the memory where the key code and the status of all the keys is stored. So this FIFO, it is the RAM. Okay. Now whenever a key is pressed, or whenever a pressed key is scanned by the 8279, then it is going to store the key code into the FIFO RAM along with the status of the shift and the control keys. And in this mode, when two keys are pressed simultaneously, then only the first key is accessed, or that will be identified. So that is the scan keyboard mode with two key lockout. The second scan keyboard mode is scan keyboard with N key rollover. Now in this mode, whenever one or more keys are pressed, okay, whenever two keys or more than two keys are pressed, then each of the key will be identified by the CPU. Okay. Whereas in the two key lockout, only the first key was identified, whereas in the N key rollover, all the keys which are pressed, they will be executed in the sequence when they are pressed. Okay. So in this mode, each key depression is treated independently. Now in this mode, each key depression, it is treated independently. So when a key is pressed, the debounce logic, it is going to wait for the two keyboard scans. Okay, means after one scan, it will wait for two key scans, and it will check that whether the key is still pressed or not. If it is still pressed, then the code of that key will be entered in FIFO RAM, otherwise it will not be stored. So if the key has to be pressed up till the two keyboard scans, then only its code will be entered. Okay. So in the sequence, any number of keys, they can be pressed and they can be simultaneously recognized by the 8279 in the order in which they are pressed and in the order in which they are scanned by the 8279. So here all the keys which are pressed, they will be scanned, they will be accessed by the 8279, whereas in the two key lockout, only the first key that will be accessed by the 8279. Okay. So that's the difference between the 2 key lockout and the N key rollover modes. Now the third type of scan keyboard mode is the scan keyboard with special error. This mode, it is valid only under the N key rollover mode. Now this mode, it can be programmed using end, interrupt or error mode set command. Okay, so for setting each of the modes, we have the command words. We can use the, or we can program these modes using the various command words. So this mode, special error mode, it can be programmed using the end interrupt or the error mode set command. Okay. Key rollover mode, we have studied that when simultaneously more than one key is pressed, then the keyboard scan means this 8279, it is going to wait for two keyboard scans, and if it is going to check that whether the key is still pressed after the two keyboard scans, and if it is still pressed, then only its code will be stored in the FIFO RAM. Now this special error mode, it is valid under the N key rollover mode. So here, if during a single debounce period, means like the two keyboard scans, if two keys are found pressed, then this is considered as simultaneous depression and an error flag is set. So in the N key rollover mode, it is waiting for two keyboard scans and it was checking that whether the key was pressed or not. Now if after two keyboard scans the two keys are still pressed, okay, so that will be considered as the simultaneous depression or simultaneous pressing of the keys, and that is taken as an error and an error flag is set. Okay, so that is why this mode, it is known as the special error mode. Special error mode means the condition where two keys are found to be pressed simultaneously. Okay, so in that case error is generated and an error flag is set. Now when this error flag is set, then this is going to prevent further writing in the FIFO RAM, because in the FIFO RAM the key codes of the pressed key are stored. Now when two keys are pressed simultaneously, so error is generated, this flag is set, so this flag will prevent further writing of the key codes in the FIFO RAM, but it will allow the generation of interrupts to the CPU, because whenever a key is pressed and the key code is stored in the FIFO RAM, and then that key code will be read by the CPU, because 8279 it is going to interrupt the CPU that key has been pressed and you have to perform the response of that key. So these interrupts are generated by the 8279 to interrupt the CPU, so that the CPU it is going to read the FIFO RAM, and the RAM will be then emptied once it is read by the CPU. So further writing is interrupted in the FIFO, but the interrupts are given to the CPU so that the CPU can read the FIFO RAM and FIFO get empty, so that further keys which are pressed, their information can be stored in the RAM. So this is the special error mode, where the two keys, if they are simultaneously pressed, then error will be generated, error flag will be set, and this flag will stop writing the information in the FIFO RAM, so that first it will get empty and then further storage can begins. Okay, so these were the three types of the scan keyboard mode. Now again come to the second type of the input or the keyboard mode, which is the scanned sensor mode. Okay, so second type of input or keyboard mode is the scanned sensor matrix. Now, as in the scanned keyboard mode, a keyboard was interfaced with the CPU using the encoded and the decoded scans. Here, a sensor matrix or a sensor array can be interfaced with the CPU using the encoded and the decoded scans method. So in this mode, a sensor array can be interfaced with the 8279 using either encoded or decoded scans. Now, what's the difference between encoded and decoded scan? With the encoded scan, 8x8 sensor matrix, just like in the keyboard mode, we have the 8x8 keyboard can be interfaced. Here we have 8x8 sensor matrix that can be interfaced. Whereas with decoded scan, we have 4x8 sensor matrix. So it is basically the difference of the size of the matrix in the encoded and the decoded scans. Here we have 8x8 and here in decoded we have 4x8. Now just like in the keyboard scan mode, the key which is pressed, the key code which is associated with the key which is pressed will be stored in the FIFO RAM. Now here we have the sensors are connected with the 8279. So here the sensor codes, those will be stored in the sensor RAM. So for every sensor we have a code that is known as the sensor code, and when that sensor is connected with the 8279, then the sensor code will be stored in the sensor RAM. Okay, so here we have the sensor codes. Okay, sensor codes are stored in the CPU addressable sensor RAM. The CPU can read the codes of the sensors from the sensor RAM, and then it can know that this sensor is connected with the 8279. So these are the scanned sensor matrix mode. Now the third type of input mode, it is the strobed input. Now in this strobed mode, if the control line it goes low, means it becomes low, that means its value is 0. So the data on the return lines, we have the 8 return lines RL0 to RL7. So these return lines, they are connected with the RAM. So whenever the control line it goes low, the data which is available on the return lines, that will be stored in the FIFO RAM byte by byte. Okay, so first the 1 byte will be stored, means the 8 bits will be stored on the FIFO RAM, then again the 8 bits will be stored. So in this way 8 bytes will be stored in the FIFO RAM, because we have the FIFO RAM as 8 byte. So byte by byte the data will be stored on the RAM when this control line goes low. So this mode is the strobed input mode. Okay, so we studied the 3 input modes. First was the scan keyboard mode, in which we studied the 3 types: the 2 key lockout, the N key rollover, and the special error mode. Then we studied the second type of the input mode, which is the scanned sensor matrix mode. Then the third type, which is the strobed input mode. So these were the input modes of 8279. Now let's come to the output modes, which are also known as the display modes. We have 2 types of display modes. First is the display scan and second is the display entry mode. So let us study these 2 output modes. First we will start with the display scan. Now in this mode we have the different types of displays which are connected, because 8279 it can interface display devices also. So there will be different sizes of the display devices. So in the display scan, these display devices will be scanned by the 8279. So in this mode, display scan, the 8279 programmable keyboard display controller, it is going to provide 8 or 16 character multiplexed display. Okay, we can have different types of displays. Their size can be 8 character or 16 characters, and these displays, they can be organized as dual 4-bit or single 8-bit display units. We have the 8, we can divide it into 4 bits displays also, and if we have 16 character display, then we can divide it into a single 8-bit display unit also. Okay, so here we can have the different types of display devices which can be scanned by the 8279. The next mode we have is the display entry. Now, in this mode, display entry mode, the data which is displayed on the display devices, it can have different types of entries like left entry also and right entry also. So this mode, it provides different type of entry of the data on the display devices. So depending upon the entry of the data, that is either from the right side or from the left side, there are two types of display entry modes. One is the left entry mode and second is the right entry mode. So from the name it is specified that left entry mode means the data it is going to enter from the left side, and in the right entry mode the data it is going to enter from the right side. So let us study the two modes, left entry mode and the right entry mode. Now left entry mode means the data it is going to enter from the left side, just like in the typewriters. Whenever we write data or we type the data in the typewriters, then the first character it appears on the left side of the page, and then it starts printing the next characters. So this left entry mode, it is also known as the typewriter mode, because in typewriter also the character is first entered in on the left side and then further the characters are printed. So the data it is entered from the left side of the display unit. So we can say that the address 0 of the display RAM, it will contains the leftmost character, and address 15 of the display RAM, it will contain the last character. Okay, so address 0, it contains the leftmost display character, and address 15 contains the rightmost character. Okay, so if we have the addresses like starting from 0 to 15, because we have a 16 byte this display RAM, so this 0 it is going to contain the leftmost character, and address 15 it is going to contain the rightmost character. So this is the left entry mode. Now comes the right entry mode. Now this in this right entry mode, the first character it will be entered at the rightmost place, okay, right hand side. And just like in the calculator, we see in the calculator when we enter the digits, then the digit will be entered at the right hand side, and then the next digit first will be displaced on the left hand side, and then the second character will be placed, and then third will be placed. So one by one bit or one by one place the characters are going to shift to the left hand side, and on the right hand side the characters will be entered. So in this mode, it is also known as the calculator mode, and in this mode the first entry the first entry is entered on the rightmost display. So first entry is made at the right hand side, and the next entry it is also placed on the right hand side, but after the previous display is shifted to left by one position. So these are the two types of entry of the display data on the display RAM, okay, which is the left entry mode and the right entry mode. So these are the different modes of operation of the 8279, that is the programmable keyboard display controller. We studied the two types of modes, input mode and the output mode. In input mode, we studied the three types, scan keyboard and then sensor matrix and the strobed input. And in the display mode or the output modes, we studied the display scan and the display entry modes. So I hope that this topic is clear to you. Thank you.